Hi everyone, we are Team 3. We interviewed Giant Eagle, Tucker Ahrensberg, and Grossman Yannick and Ford. Matt and I are going to start with Giant Eagle. We had the privilege of interviewing David Shapira. He was the CEO and chairman of Giant Eagle for many years. He began his career there in 1971, and he gave us a lot of useful insight about how ethics is really used in business, in the real world. Basically, a really interesting quote that he gave us is that the most important way to communicate ethics is to act that way, which is something that we talked about in class. Your employees can read all your ethics conduct, you can tell them all these things, but if you're not doing them, they're not going to want to follow them. A specific problem that they ran into is to shrink or not to shrink. They're in a business where they sell produce, they need to estimate how much they'll sell, because if they don't sell it, it gets thrown away. If they don't have it, then customers are turned away. So they had this back and forth pendulum between shrink management, or managing their losses, as what shrink they've called it. So managers, they found, specifically in the meat department, the meat has a very short shelf life. So they found that managers were actually repackaging this meat to manage their shrink. This came about, and obviously Mr. Shapira explained that there's a zero tolerance policy, but they really have to try to manage this pendulum between shrink management and customer satisfaction. For their formal ethics program, they obviously incorporate ethics into their hiring. Specifically, after employees are hired, they show them a video of Shapira and his son actually talking about ethical issues they could run into. This really lets their employees know right away that this is a family company, they care about ethics, and specifically Shapira and his son, they care about ethics right at the top. So that's very useful for them. They have a formal code of conduct, as most businesses do. And specifically, which is really interesting, they have an anonymous ethics hotline. We found this really interesting because this gives employees an outlet to anonymously, obviously, report things that they may not feel like they would be able to report otherwise. They don't want to be labeled as a whistleblower or something like that. So he specifically said that they haven't had much success with this as far as reporting stealing and things like that, but mistreatment of team members and sexual harassment, they have found very effective use of the hotline for that.
All right, like Audra said earlier, my name's Matt, and I'm going to be talking about the corporate social responsibility of Giant Eagle. Now, they believe that they had 4 constituents that they need to serve: their customers, their team members, which are their employees, community, and the shareholders. And Mr. Shapiro said that we can put that those are in no particular order except for the last one, being the shareholders. He went on to explain that if they could accommodate the needs of the customers, team members, and the community, that the shareholders would also be satisfied and the company would make profits. One thing that Giant Eagle does, and that not many other companies do, is that they give back 5% of their pre-tax profits to the local community that they're in. And growing up in Moon Township, I had a Giant Eagle, and my family went there once or twice a week. And one thing I really admired about Giant Eagle is that they hired mentally impaired people to do some of the simpler tasks, like bagging groceries or stocking shelves. And that's really the only company I've ever seen that happen with. And Mr. Shapiro is proud, and he's proud to call that one of his, one of his biggest triumphs as the CEO of Giant Eagle. Another example of conflicting ethics that Mr. Shapiro ran into over his career was whether or not to sell cigarettes at stores because of health problems, and whether or not to sell pornography because of their label as a family store. And ultimately, Mr. Shapiro decided to continue to sell cigarettes and to not continue to sell pornography.
Hi, my name is Brendan Walker. I'll be talking about the accounting firm that we interviewed. We studied Grossman, Yannick, and Ford, which is a relatively small accounting and consulting firm. It's based primarily in the Pittsburgh area, and it's relatively small. It has around 55 employees. We talked with David Frick, who is an auditor and a senior accountant at the firm. He is focused in ethics and was very excited to talk to us. He basically told us that there's 2 formal ethics codes that the employees follow. The first one is the employee manual, which is all the employees are required to read it, and it's basically taken directly from the AICPA. The second one is the quality control manual, which is read primarily by the managers and helps them, it basically relates to the quality of work and helps them gives them guidelines for ethics for managers. In leadership, the leaders basically have their choice of how they want to handle the ethics and when making decisions, but they are mostly CPAs, so they have to follow the standard CPA guidelines. Grossman and Ford takes ethics very seriously, and they have not had any major ethical concerns or issues. Ethics for employees are consistently and constantly emphasized. So they're always having like presentations. David Frick mentioned that he gives out presentations about once or twice a year to the employees to reiterate the ethics code because they like to be very formal with their ethics. The firm is takes a lot of pride in hiring people with high ethical standards. Misconduct and ethical issues. For interpersonal issues, employees are encouraged to report problems to their managers or HR. And if the problem persists, they'll be reassigned to a different client or moved to a new location. And if the problem is severe enough, they'll be terminated from the company. For ethical issues related to financial statements, employees are required to bring it up to their managers, who will then bring it up to higher management, and hopefully the issue can be resolved. Lastly, the informal system. There's a lot of socialization, group work, and good social atmosphere for the employees. They work in groups and basically spend a lot of time together, so that builds a lot of bonds between all the employees there. And we asked David Frick about their role models at the company, and basically he said they're very proud of the founders and partners. They basically all look up to them as role models.
Hi, I'm Jacob Jerry. I'm with the group that interviewed Tucker Ahrensberg Law Firm. We met with Allison Hurley, who is the chief marketing executive of the firm, actually, so she holds a decent amount of power in the firm. She was actually very friendly to us. She loved to help out Pittsburgh students. She was a graduate of Katz Business School herself and had been to a few law firms before finally settling at Tucker Ahrensberg. So she did have a lot of experience in what we were talking about, and she was very well prepared to talk about business ethics. We got into their ethical policies, and her first response to what their ethical policy is was basically that all lawyers are expected to be aware of all the ethical and legal issues that they might encounter. They only hire employees that pass the bar exam, so you know that everyone working there has a pretty extensive background in ethics and how that is incorporated into the law world, I guess. All employees are given a formal ethics code after they're hired. The code is only updated every once in a while. It's not updated very often at all, but that kind of makes sense since it only really needs to be changed when the laws change themselves. After that, they don't really have any formal training, but they do have the law firm itself does have professional liability insurance that protects the firm from potential unethical actions of lawyers that they might not have any control over. So they kind of have a shield around them to prevent any blowback from a really bad decision that somebody makes that could get the firm itself in a lot of trouble if they didn't have that insurance. In terms of where employees can go to report unethical behavior, they have a lot of outlets. They can turn to practice attorneys, the HR division. They have mentors, and they have heads of professional liability committee, and they can report their unethical behavior there. And if it is that bad, it actually goes up to the board of directors, and the board of directors themselves kind of vote whether they should tell the shareholders to terminate or to keep an employee. But it seemed like in Allison's own experience, they hadn't had any major ethical issues that had required something to actually go that far that somebody be terminated. So she didn't really have any actual examples to tell us about. The great thing about their ethical policy that we encountered was that, one, they only hire lawyers that have extensive training, so you know everyone that's working there is going to know what they're dealing with and how to respond to certain situations. The good thing is that they also get a code of ethics. We were glad to hear that they didn't just hire them without giving them any formal written code that tells the lawyers what's expected of them. Another great thing is they have so many options with who to report unethical behavior to. But the one thing that we encountered was that they could improve this by implementing a way for lawyers to report unethical behavior anonymously. So maybe if it's something that has to do with like sexual harassment or something that maybe an employee might not feel comfortable going to a manager or an advisor for, they could report that through some kind of anonymous outlet. It might help the firm catch more potential cases of unethical behavior. Employees are encouraged to question authority when they do something wrong or when they do something they think is unethical. They're encouraged to question managers and bosses that tell them to do something that they think isn't in the best interest of the firm itself or in the clients. And one thing that we found out that was actually surprised all of us was that Tucker Ahrensberg won the 2013 Pittsburgh Business Ethics Award, which is actually a pretty big deal because that just shows that they're one of the top businesses in the Pittsburgh area in terms of having a strict and successful ethics policy. The not so good about their ethics policy and some things that we thought that they could improve upon. One of the biggest issues with ethics in this particular law firm or law firms in general is that nothing is really in black and white. Like you can give somebody an ethics policy and tell them this is how they're expected to behave, but at the end of the day, the lawyers have to act in the client's best interest. So the decision to make unethical behavior is based off of the lawyer's judgment themselves. The lawyers are encouraged to kind of do what they can for clients because they're work for them, but if it involves something unethical, they might do it anyway as long as they're not actually breaking the law. No seminars and meetings are held to discuss updates to the ethics policy. They kind of just update them and don't really tell anyone about them, which was something that we thought they could improve upon by holding semi-annual meetings in which lawyers are informed about how unethical decisions are made by other lawyers in the area, and they could like train them how to react to these situations to make sure that Tucker Ahrensberg doesn't encounter the same kind of ethical issues that other firms in the Pittsburgh area did. She actually gave us a pretty good example of a situation like this in which a lawyer that used to work for Tucker Ahrensberg actually was laid off or quit, and he joined another law firm in the Pittsburgh area, and just a year later he got tangled up in this huge lawsuit with an issue with him claiming power of attorney over a deceased woman and investing her money and putting her money in different charity funds, and there was a big issue there, and we asked Allison what they could have done to prevent something like this, like how lucky they were that it wasn't them, and yeah, she agreed that they didn't really have anything in place to prevent something like that from happening, except for the liability insurance, which would probably protect the firm itself. And managers aren't trained in ethics when they're hired. They just are assumed that they have a background in ethics, so it might make more sense to provide formal training on the firm's ethical culture and just how the firm itself operates, instead of just like assuming that they learned everything in textbooks and classrooms. And it might help them more easily integrate into the workplace and know what's expected from them.
So as Jacob mentioned before, these firms have a few things they could improve upon. We tried to really compare them. They're all on such different scales that was a little bit difficult. But specifically, something that we saw in Giant Eagle that could be really useful for the other two firms is their anonymous hotline. As we mentioned, it can be difficult for employees to feel that they can report something without having backlash and being called a whistleblower. So this could really benefit the other two as well.
Another thing that Giant Eagle did well that other firms didn't is that they had an ethics video with their current CEO talking to the new team members or employees about what their ethical code is and what their standards are. And that could be beneficial to the other two firms. And also, one thing that Giant Eagle admitted to needing improvement is cultural diversity in upper management positions.
And for Grossman, Yannick, and Ford, they mentioned that they didn't have a specific section or department for ethics, so we thought maybe they could implement an ethics committee or hire an official ombudsman to deal with like some of the